we are here to launch it and have our discussion on a very important topic also, because before just this afternoon there was a press conference downstairs around this issue only in a larger framework. So we are here and we have some important people, some experts who will be talking about different aspects of this issue, framing the media, government policies, law, and freedom of press in India. I won't do say anything about the book, and the panelists who are going to speak today.
Which the government is arguing that contrary to law established by the Supreme Court in Shreya Singhal, which was a case again which is very beautifully charted in this book, and it's incomplete promises, but much further down, which is also charted here, which are the holy trinity of press cases, which is Sakal newspapers, Bennett and Coleman, and Indian Express.
Book, it's like, I know what happened the last 25 years, but why this book is important is because it tells us what happened during the British era to newspaper and to the press, and immediately after that, the independence and all, how they dealt with the question about freedom of press.
She talks about at great length the role specifically AIR and Doordarshan played during the emergency period, how and the restrictions that were placed on the kind of programming they would have to were forced to carry.
And I'm not just because alphabetically Apar start with A, but also he is someone who is not just fighting inside the court about these issues, but also outside the court. So, Apar.
Yes. Firstly, congratulations to you, Pamela, and thank you to the editors and publishers for sending me an advance copy. I think this book is excellent on length, and it is aimed for young people, possibly only in 149 pages, excluding references, and it makes it also very light to carry, but there's depth inside it. And I found that depth in the last chapter, which is dedicated to charting the arc of how digital control is the way it is today. Because I'm reminded of Snowden's book, in Permanent Record, in which he says the internet was not like this when he started accessing it. And so if you look at the internet and the changes which have occurred, they are occurring at such a rapid velocity when it comes to journalism and the press. And it's just, I'll just take two instances to describe how it's been interacting with our work at Internet Freedom Foundation. Very recently, we saw that there was a stampede, unfortunate, tragic, on the New Delhi railway station, and people were tweeting videos from there citing alarm. And this was also not only people, but also press organizations which were then using those videos and publishing them. And in a few hours, they were scrubbed off our timelines on Twitter, which has a very small user base in India, but it has a very influential user base. It comprises of journalists, members of parliaments, and also then has journalists, press houses from foreign countries, right? And this kind of visibility, we need to step back and makes us consider what is our status as a country in ensuring public safety, right? And this is how accountability is entrusted. Now, later on, it came to be discovered that these tweets were removed from Twitter on the basis of a power which was secretly bestowed to the railway ministry, which has never exercised this power historically. It has always been the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, or much more recently, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. And there was a portal which was set up, which was called Sahyog, which means cooperation, on which constitutional arguments have just concluded yesterday evening at 7 p.m. in the Karnataka High Court, in which the government is arguing that contrary to law established by the Supreme Court in Shreya Singhal, which was a case again which is very beautifully charted in this book and its incomplete promises, but much further down, which is also charted here, which are the holy trinity of press cases, which is Sakal newspapers, Bennett and Coleman, and Indian Express. The union government is arguing that's not good law any longer. Reasonable restrictions are not enough for us. We need more, because the internet, due to its speed, distribution, and its ability to spread quote-unquote misinformation, requires a whole of government response. So they want the ability to notify any government ministry which can send takedown notices secretly on a portal on which none of us can log, which can scrub our timelines, and there are only two participants there, social media companies, and these around 400, 500 or 600 officers which will be notified. This is all present in their pleadings. And it presents a really troubling question for all of us, that are we building on the learnings which have come through these battles which the press have fought through their reporting, but also through opposing government censorship through the decades? And is the internet fundamentally that different that the government can go beyond the constitutional powers which are there? The second thing I'd like to mention is that during the armed hostilities between our country and Pakistan, which is called popularly as Operation Sindoor, there were blockings which were done of at least 16 independent online news publications on their social media handles. These blockings were done without any notices to them, without any reference to law, and once they corresponded with the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, subsequent to that, their handles were restored. And we may think, or people may think, that so what if a journalist's Twitter account is blocked? Quite often, the space which is offered online, especially for digital first publications, is the only space they have for reaching their audience, and also for the modern nature of reporting, which requires interactivity as well as a level of conversation which is derived over time. In fact, quite often digital news media platforms source stories on the basis of what conversation is taking place online due to chronic underinvestment in reporting, which makes the digital sphere central to what we know constitutes the reporting function today. Here I would compliment this book for devoting a special chapter. There's an afterword which is present here, and I just like to be a little much more pessimistic, because it is an optimistic note on which you end, in which you hope that the institutions, the people, and the larger journalistic fraternity stands up for constitutional values. I'm reminded of a book at a time when the internet penetration was just growing, which prophesized rather than the internet's provision by itself in isolation to deepen the freedom of speech and expression. Every person with a smartphone with a 4G connection immediately becomes a broadcaster, immediately becomes a journalist, immediately becomes able to express themselves with a very low amount of government censorship. At least that is what was imagined. However, what we see today has been a delusion. This is captured in the book Net Delusion, in which it was prophesied that like any other technical infrastructure of our society, even the internet will ultimately be molded by those who hold power, if that power is not moderated under a constitutional framework. I hope this book finds its space in libraries, in journalistic courses, as well as with lawyers and hopefully judges and legislators. Thank you.
And first, huge congratulations to Pamela for this book. As Apar said, it's a book that can be easily carried, around. And my bag, I've been carrying it for the last couple of days. And so just to go to where Mahtab is asking me to, it's like starting as a journalist in United News of India. By the way, I was the first I think the woman journalist from Northeast to be hired by United News of India in its New Delhi headquarters. And this was quite a new world for me. And we started journalism like without, it was nameless journalism. We were all given we lost our names in the process. We were all given these initials. I was like BS, Barooah Sangeeta. Okay, and then we still call a lot of my former colleagues and all by those names. Even PTI people, I think, will be calling. This is like that kind of a thing in the news agency scenario. And so I still remember the first time that they were deciding that the stories, if you do special stories, it will be going with your byline, So byline was a big thing, and I happened to be the first one that the UNI used, my byline with the full this thing. And I was like looking at where is it going to get published, So we started from there, like faceless journalism. That I always call it faceless because the name didn't matter. What you wrote mattered. And then we saw arrival of television, where NDTV and all the faces were put in front, that you have to believe this person, that the news is given by this person, so the face and the name are very important, we saw. And so it's a long journey. And then, of course, with digital, we see that particularly what happened to the Wire recently, all the 10 years of work then go in 1 minute if it is blocked by the government. So this is what we have seen, like there was a time when journalists were also, for journalist issues, I had seen that they would be united. For it's like one house when it comes to the journalist cause. But today, it's a huge thing. Like we are fighting at the press club. We are fighting for inclusion of the journalistic exemption in the DPDP Act at the moment. And but we are not too sure what kind of journalist unity we'll be able to generate if we at all need to go to the court or also to the to protest against the government of the day. So this is where we have come to. So it's a quite a stretch, and all this while it is actually what the biggest victim is, the freedom of press. That is the biggest victim. So that's why this book is extremely important. And I was just telling Mahtab the other day, I think that this book, it's like, I know what happened the last 25 years. But why this book is important is because it tells us what happened during the British era to newspaper and to the press. And immediately after that, the independence and all, how they dealt with the question about, freedom of press. It was like those formative years, how did they look at freedom of press? Because today, like on July 28, we are called by the Métis Ministry to, in response to a memorandum we had given on this DPDP Act. And there one of the officers was saying that, personal data is now, privacy is a fundamental right. And I was just thinking that, freedom, where is freedom of press then? So because we all look at freedom of press as like part of the Article 19. And but as a right to work. But you also talk about how they were looking at that, dealing with that question, whether freedom of press should be the fundamental rights. So there's a lot of things. It's a mine of information. It is. And also takes us to the discussions of the Constituent Assembly and the formation of these first press commission, what they dealt with it, the second press commission, what were the recommendations. In fact, the first press commission I thought was so progressive. It actually, I think it was the first one that talked about having the need to form unions. Yeah, this was like, the journalists should form unions. And there was a discussion around that time that why should journalists do that? Because their work is very intellectual, very different. They're not like the work, like they should not be looked as a labor, or, there should not be labor unions. But then they said that the press as a media is coming up as an industry. So it has to have that format, those arguments. When I was looking at that, and then I saw actually the dismantling of the whole unions of the journalist union process, and I was thinking, God, I mean, like, this is actually the thought, and where have we reached? I remember when I was in UNI, I was a part of the employees union. It was a uh, you have to be elected, I mean, like, it is like a very important post. So those kind of things, and you would have to go and negotiate on behalf of the journalist and all that. It was so, that's when I realized, I said, we took so many things for granted, actually, and when I'm looking back after so many years, and your book is actually such a reminder that, that we are still dealing with the question of freedom of press, like, which started then, and we are still not able to find a proper answer to that. And so for that, the biggest victim is actually the Indian democracy. Yeah, thank you.
It's quite an important book, and it has and it couldn't have come at a better time, uh, for the simple reason that the kind of the conditions in which the press is operating today, uh, as they say, more things change, they remain the same. And the book starts somewhere with, I mean, she goes back to the first censorship law that was passed in 1799, and from there today, if we take the see the kind of, like Apar talked about, the takedown notices that are being issued and blocking of content. So when you travel through this arc, you see that a lot of things have remained the same. Not much has changed in the mindset when it comes to the relationship between the sovereign and the citizens, and also the changing nature of the social contract. The other thing is, what like Mehtab asked that about uh, the television scene, and she, this book, she has delved quite a lot in the early days of the evolution of AIR and Doordarshan, and how it started with what Doordarshan started with, what, four transmitters or five, four transmitters, and AIR service was also very limited, and how AIR grew. But the most important thing that this addresses was that, uh, by that time, I think by 60s and the 70s, it was very clear that, and by the way, the television came into India. We see, there is a popular perception that it came in the 80s, but actually in 1959, 58, the first television broadcast that took place. So that is quite a long way back. Uh, the thing is that how it has evolved. By the 60s, it was very clear that these two are the two most powerful medium to carry the state's narrative to the people. And what was that narrative at that point of time was basically about integration and social reforms, and that. Then she talks about at great length the role the specifically AIR and Doordarshan played during the emergency period, how and the restrictions that were placed on the kind of programming they would have to were forced to carry. Even the slightest, you refer to the Amin Siani incident, in that even the slightest deviation from the laid down line would result in banning people from the airwaves. And then, when the control was absolutely iron fisted on the state broadcasters and AIR and Doordarshan, and those who were opposing the emergency at that time, most notably the so-called the Jansangh, the leaders of Jansangh, Advani and Vajpayee, and of course JP. And so one of the thing was, after post emergency, there was a great debate about how to kind of give a degree of autonomy to the state broadcasters and AIR. and a committee was formed under BG Varghese, and it made some amazingly progressive recommendations. It went to the extent of saying that these two, AIR and Doordarshan, should be absolutely free from any kind of a government control, and they should be made independent. When the committee's report was given to Advani's comment was, and she mentions it in the book, he tells Varghese that we asked for autonomy, you have given us independence. So that kind of hypocrisy from, I mean, across political ideologies about when it comes to press freedom, what I'm trying to say is that the positions that political parties have adopted since 47 till date has been marked with a great deal of hypocrisy. Everybody talks about it, but nobody really wants to kind of free the press. In fact, very few progressive legislations have been kind of made to expand freedoms. The courts, on the other hand, have, whenever they have got the opportunity, they have kind of taken a liberal view. The other thing is that Apar mentioned, and there is a trinity of cases, that the Express versus Government of India, Sakal versus Government of India, and Bennett and Coleman. Now, each of these cases address three very specific issues that are like very important at that point of time for the print media, and to some extent even today. Now, these two cases were filed by the three organizations against the backdrop of the first Press Commission report. And that led to the setting up of the first wage board, which said clearly that the wages of journalists are extremely poor. So what the recommendation was that a mayor for journalists in 1958, they recommended that in metros, the journalist should be a minimum salary of 225 rupees, and in non-metros, 150 rupees. Who goes to the court immediately against this order of the wage board is the great Ramnath Goenka, who has been championed as the great upholder of press freedom. I mean, and he goes again and says he was at that point of time the largest owner of newspapers and magazines in the country. 8 to 10 editions of Indian Express. He had Dinatanti in Tamil, Lok Satta in Marathi, Andhra Prabha or Andhra Jyoti, one of these. In Telugu, Screen, and at that time when he was fighting this case, he was expanding his real estate like anything. So and he goes to, and the line he takes in the court is that if we increase the salaries, it will like put an unbearable financial burden on the company, and that is why we won't be able to print the newspapers, and that in turn violates Article 19(1)(a). And the same man in 1978 gets caught in a fraud transaction of newsprint, that he buys tons of fictitious newsprint which doesn't exist in real life from a fictitious company that he's only set up, and then takes loan on that inventory from the bank, and he gets caught. His son got convicted, he escaped, and Gurumurthy helped him to escape. I mean, he kind of involved, and this and a great deal more is like recorded in B.G. Varghese's book, and also in an article that was published in Caravan a few years ago about what Ramnath Goenka was, and he was least interested in expanding freedom of the press. Similarly, the Bennett and Coleman case, again it involved newsprint. The government wanted to, because it was a very precious commodity, the government wanted to have some sort of a control on access so that smaller publications get access to newsprint. They go to the court, government wanted to put a duty structure. They go to the court saying that if we are like, the duty structure was like based on the circulation, that so many copies, above so many copies, so much percent of duty. And the Jains go to the court and say that if you do this, it will put a financial burden. By the 78, it was it was the largest, it was on year-to-year growth by 78, I think, 78. It was the largest growing newspaper. It was the fastest growing newspaper. And he again takes the thing that this will ruin our financial situation, and that is why we won't be able to print news. So in effect, again he takes refuge of 19(1)(a) as violation of freedom of expression. So these incidents are very interesting. It not only the book also lays out a relationship between the expansion of the press, how press has evolved, and the kind of laws that were framed.
Okay, because I didn't want to leave out anyone, so I just wanted, I mean, this is like a last note, but first, a big thanks to the panelists for taking the trouble to read this book and commenting on it. I owe them a great deal. To Sangeeta for her instinctive interest in books in general, of all stripes. To Vivek for being involved in crafting a law. By the way, Vivek was involved in coming out with a law that the Press Club of India actually is planning to put out in the open. And we have our lawyer friends here who will be part of the drafting committee. So there is a lot of activity that, the president spoke about, which is an ongoing thing. And to Apar for systematically responding to every move the government has made or planning to make to control freedom of expression. I'm just amazed at the way he actually sometimes even anticipates government action. To Mahtab, who moderated the discussion, gratitude for actually for suggesting this venue for the launch of this book. And I thought that this venue is very important. I mean, it's easy to do things at IIC and here and there, but the Press Club of India has one of the custodians and has stake in press freedom, is the right site for a discussion of this kind. That's why I'm very grateful to Mahtab for suggesting it. I want to thank the publishers for going ahead despite the present climate and putting out this book in black and white. It's a modest book, a monograph, but the subject is expansive, enlivening, and it's something that all of us here in this room can participate in. Happy that my editor, Sana Jain, could take part in these proceedings and actually introduce us to the audience, introduce our panelists to the audience. Thank you, Sana, for doing that. Finally, thanks to you all, dear friends, for making it to this venue. It's not easy, especially when Parliament is in session and the sky is always threatened and the traffic as well as the security is so impossible. But you made it, despite the odds, and for that a big salam. 3 aspects struck me forcibly as I tried to trace the historical arc of freedom of speech and expression from the late 18th century to the present day. One, that those who rule, whether in pre-British times, during the British Raj, or during post-independence era, through various governments, including those headed by the Congress, the Janata Party, coalitions of various categories, and the BJP, invariably want to rule what you, the citizen, thinks and speaks. The BJP years are particularly striking in this regard, given that all speech that undermines the project of building an authoritarian Hindutva state is viewed with suspicion. Every speech. So that is, I think, the lens through which we have to view government action today. The second aspect is how deeply this country represented not so much by its political parties as much as by its constitutional forebears, those who struggled during the national movements, and ordinary women and men and children of this country, children too, of this country, have valued. I don't know if any of you saw this young woman arguing with Anjum. He had this camera, and she was so articulate. I said, where did she do her schooling? Because she had the power to say that my rights are being trampled on. Why have they taken my home away from me? And she said it with so children are invested in this project, and I was so happy to see her. I think she should be really given a kind of education that will bring out the innate genius in her. So men, women, and children of this country have valued and continue to value freedom of speech and expression, regarding it foundational to their idea of India. Third, and of course the most important, is that freedom has been bitterly fought for. This freedom that we are talking about, which is so bitterly fought for so many years, has been the site of pitched battles in the past, and will also be one of the most contested in the public sphere, even as the socio-political system attempts to entrap, crush, and silence us. One transparency activist, and I think Apar referred to him, came up with an adage that should come as a reminder in the days ahead. When exposing a crime is treated as committing a crime, you are being ruled by criminals. That's what Snowden said. We would add, when one's speech, written word, or artistic creation is treated as a crime, it is a sure sign that we are being ruled by criminals. So I would like to throw this discussion open to the audience who has listened so patiently to us.
It is bringing this whole thing into for discussion, who is a journalist? Okay, like when we saw this whole, the FIR being launched, this filed against Ajit, it's been said as a YouTuber. He's like 30 years of journalism, so you're now being reduced to the position of a YouTuber, and this is the government which is actually giving interviews to only you are full-time YouTubers. So this is something quite crazy that's happening with the rise of the digital media. We're also being seeing this kind of attack on the very question, the very definition of a journalist. So this is something quite alarming for, I think, for what we are getting to see and what is going to come from that. And that we see the reflection of that we see in the DPDP Act now. Like when we were having the meeting with the ministry on July 28th, one of the officers said that one of the reasons that they took out that line, which was there in the draft bill, the journalistic work will be exempted from the act. They removed that because they were not too sure who's a journalist. And so this was quite crazy, and we told them that the government will not be deciding who is a journalist. If at all this decision has to be taken, it's to be taken by the elected bodies of the journalists. Journalists themselves will decide who is a journalist. It is not the government job. In any way, my job as a journalist is to question the government of the day, which is you. So how will you decide who is a journalist? So this is a crazy thing that is happening along with the rise of the digital era. I think it's quite a...
By the mainstream newspapers, when journalists practicing journalism in remote areas, in Bastar, in Northeast, in Jharkhand, in these places, they are attacked, they are killed, they are not considered as journalists. Even by the newspapers and the publications and media outlets they have been reporting for, they do not stand for them. Case in point is the case of Mukesh Chandrakar, who was killed earlier this year in Bastar for exposing corruption in Bastar. And he was, and I remember seeing a front page story in Indian Express where journalists
was in court. I mean, his journalism was full. He was a full-time journalist. And here it is also important to understand why these people, Mukesh Chandrakar or Abish Kumar or Ajit Anjum, or these people are becoming quote-unquote YouTubers.
I would just like to add here the name of Dilawar Hussain, also from Assam,
Yeah.
who was accused by the Assam Chief Minister, not the journalist, because he went to look into a story of corruption.
Exactly. And he was arrested twice. He was released, given bail, and again arrested. Also the question why these people are becoming YouTubers, quote unquote YouTubers, or they become freelancers. There are many people who are forced to do things, and that's why, I mean, they are often not considered journalists even by their own fraternity, and that creates a problem. And that's where I think the law or the bill which we have been trying to, the Press Club of India, in association with different press clubs across the country, we are trying to put together, where we want to bring these things where journalists are protected, whether they are YouTuber or whether they work with mainstream legacy news media organization. So if Vivek, if you want to add anything on this, otherwise we'll open.
So, since you referred to this, bill and Sarin is over here, in that we had a lot of discussion uh, about this very subject: who's a journalist? So then Sarin came up with the solution that okay, a person who does these things, doesn't matter what is the method of doing it, and that those things are like collecting, distributing news, views, opinion, this, that. There's a quite a elaborate definition of that. Whether it's an individual or an organization, should be considered a journalist. So that kind of a thing, that's a pretty uh, uh, yeah. This bill was actually, it took about more than 8 months to develop, and there were other committee members in that committee, which kind of put together the bill. Hartosh Singhal, whom all you know is Caravan Executive Editor, Seema Chishti, editor of Wire. I was there. Then Dhiren Shah was part of the committee. Jatin Gandhi, he's a journalist, now he's a fact checker. He's a lawyer also. He's done his law, but he doesn't practice. So he was there. And young legal researcher Harsh Kumar, he was part of the thing. And in fact, he did most of the heavy lifting. So in that, we defined all these things. But I think there was if I'm not mistaken, UN Human Rights Commission paper number 34. You can search it on the internet. Paper number 34. In that, it was put out by the UN Human Rights Office of the Commissioner, which takes a similar line. It says that the definition of journalist is not important, but the definition of the task of journalism is important. And they go on to define that whether it is you are working in the news side or you are in the non-news side, they are all considered journalists. In fact, the definition is so wide. They also try to include people like cartoonists, graphic designers, as part of the definition of a journalist. And I think that is the way one should be going, because the way with the internet and the evolution of technology, the nature of the nature of journalism itself, I mean, that is changing and taking forms that we don't fit in any of the traditional boxes. So that should be, I think, the approach towards defining who's a journalist and what is journalism.
Thank you, Vivek. Now, if you have questions, please keep it short and identify yourself and ask a question.
Thank you and congratulations, Pam, and thank you for an excellent panel. So I have two quick questions. One is an obvious one, in fact. What are the discussions within journalism, if you like, on the use of AI for writing? I'm an academic in Agarwal, and there is a lot of discussion in academic journals on what rules to frame of acceptable or non-acceptable use of AI. That's one question. The second is how do you see the use of drones? Now, drones, you can say, can gather information. They also spy. They're weaponized. You can actually target people and kill them with the use of drones. They also remove accountability. In the present war in the Middle East, they say, well, we've used AI to target people, and if it, and so on. So there's a broader question on that technology. Panel, thank you to the panel. We look forward to reading the book. Vivek, I wanted to ask you this bill that Salim and all of you are working towards, because many of us shudder to do any legislative exercise in the current times. I think it's very interesting how you talk about who is a journalist, and it's an ever-evolving definition now, particularly due to technology and other things. My question is about the recognition. Because the whole business of accreditation, which you all would know much better than me, but I remember just in fact a few months ago I was having a conversation with Anuradha Basin, who for very good reason is not in the country anymore. And she said she's actually not an accredited journalist, and I was totally shocked. She said none of us ever get accreditation in J&K, and I imagine that is happening in other parts of the country also. I'm not very familiar. So I was just curious to understand how you are thinking about that aspect, because there's no other special protection that is given in law. And I was just wondering, Pam, if the book goes into it all dealing with, ensnaring journalists is now coming largely to criminal laws and anti-terror laws. So whether you're probing any of that.
And people like the Freedom Foundation and others have tried to work along those lines in trying to get information, collate and respond to events as they happen. Free Speech Collective is another, and so on. So I think I would have to cry off that one. But Vivek, you can take that question about the law.
About the law part, the accreditation bit, that is something which is kind of we didn't dwell too much on it, and actually the way in India it has happened, and people like Paranjay and all that, you never will. I mean, Paranjay will vouch for it, that you never really cared for accreditation. You went about your job, and in India. Accreditation is controlled by the government. It is not like in the UK where you have a National Union of Journalists, and NUJ not only accredits journalists, it also, to work in any kind of any field which is related to mass media or mass communication, even advertising, people have to be a member of NUJ to do. In India, nothing of that kind evolved. So that is one area, is that how do you, whether there should be a membership, like in law, and there is a bar council, you have, then IMA gives accreditation for doctors. So this is one profession which never had a kind of a organization or which addressed this need. And how to do that, we have not yet come up with a optimum solution. So it depends on the state governments. Some state governments gave, and it is completely at the mercy of that Babu. And it's worse at the state level, even over PIB at the central level. There are certain fixed guidelines. If you want to fulfill those guidelines, you can get an accreditation, and then you have to renew it every year. But to be very honest, until the recent past, it never mattered. And Paranja has been around for such a long time. Did you ever have a PIB accreditation? Okay.